Hello everyone, welcome to Just Move In's residential expert discussion for February 2023. I'm joined here as usual by Mark Hayward. How are you doing, Mark?
Not too bad, thank you, James. Not too bad.
I daren't ask really, but has your quarterly energy bill arrived through the door yet?
Well, looking at the state of your hair, you've obviously had yours.
Oh, that's below the belt.
I had my quarterly bill last week, having watched my smart meter for the last 3 months, thinking, oh my gosh, how much is this all costing me? And I was very, very pleasantly surprised. I don't think there are many people that could say that, but I switched with British Gas about 14 months ago, and it was a very sensible thing to do. It doesn't happen very often that you make these right decisions about paying a bit more for something, but hearing the horror stories that I'm getting from friends and family, it's not good out there.
No, I was completely shocked by my bill, and I'm going to have to learn to turn the lights off a bit more effectively, I think. We have had some building work been going on, so that's some form of excuse, but I think my children have a lot to do with this as well. So I'll be having words. So anyway, let's kick things off with talk about the market generally and state of the sector. Obviously, we've seen loads of headlines about property prices falling alarmingly, but it's not all the same. We have been receiving some mixed messages, haven't we? I mean, one report I wanted to put to you was by a data agency, 20CI, who were saying that new instructions are actually 125,000 higher than they were this time last year. But then again, you read other newspapers and it's all doom and gloom. I mean, The Guardian is saying that buyer demand and listings are down 47% from where they were. So, I mean, what's your inkling? What do you think is going on out there?
Well, I'm, as ever, getting mixed messages, and we haven't just got one property market in this country. We've got 50, 60, 100 or more, because each area responds in a different way depending on the drivers within that. So I'm getting mixed messages. I am getting messages that there's more houses coming onto the market, and that's needed. The expectation of homeowners is still high in terms of the prices they want, and yet I've been on the websites and constantly monitor them. There's a huge amount of property that has been reduced in price since the beginning of the year. But what I'm not getting that sort of doom-laden prophecies that we were possibly getting towards the end of last year. People still have to move, whatever the market. There might have been some levelling on prices. And when I say prices, those are asking prices. And just remember, a lot of the time it's reported, or the figures that are reported are based on asking prices, not on sales prices. And the only accurate sale prices are those given by Land Registry, and they're only registered subsequent to completion. So there is a long lag before getting those. And we know from the lenders that we're seeing some more encouraging fixed term rates coming in, and I think that's going to continue. All right, we've just had another rate rise, interest rate rise. Another one is possibly coming next month, but we're getting the feeling, particularly when you look over to the States, that things are going to be leveling off. So I think on the sales market, it's becoming more normal, if you can call it. There is no such thing as a normal market, but it's becoming a bit more balanced in terms of supply and demand, and that tends, the more supply you have, and if you've got a static demand, that will just ease off prices on the sales side. So I think the spring is not, normally people say, I'll put my house on the spring, in the spring because it's better. It seems to me people are just getting on with it now. So the positive thing is there is a desire to move. When we're not looking at forced sales, it's just a desire to move. So it may be that it will level itself up, but it's not a disaster.
Yeah, and I wonder as well how much of a good indicator the number of reductions, is that kind of accurate? Because we're not in the middle of a long recession at the moment. You'd still think that agents would try and pitch things relatively high with, in the knowledge that they can reduce things quite quickly if they're not getting the interest. So maybe we shouldn't panic too much about that.
I don't think panic too much, and we know that to obtain an instruction to sell, the agent is going to be, shall we say, optimistic about price. It may not be, you may not be able to justify that in terms of other deals, but he'll be optimistic. So hopefully the vendor of the property will wish him to sell it because he thinks he can get him more money. Whether that happens at the end of the day, we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you mentioned their interest rates going up to 4%, which happened, was it last week? The Bank of England did say, though, that the economic news isn't as bad as first feared. They're now saying that inflation's probably peaked, which is obviously incredibly good news for everyone. And they're also saying that the recession isn't going to be as prolonged or as deep as first feared. So that's some good news.
Yeah, it's good. It's as we know, the market is all about sentiment, and if the sentiment or the messages coming out are relatively positive, as opposed to last year when they were incredibly gloomy, we've just missed going into recession. Whether we do later in the year, I don't know. But as you say, the messages coming out are not all painted black.
Yeah. And there have been some other slightly positive stories. I mean, there was a report in the Telegraph that said although sales were down 20%, some towns are bucking the trend. And I can't remember the name of the journalist in the Telegraph, but he or she attributed this to older buyers who are obviously not so affected by interest rates because they should have more cash to be able to afford larger deposits if required, and they're downsizing.
Absolutely, and I think they're downsizing for a number of reasons. Firstly, they don't have a mortgage to pay, but if they downsize, they're going to have capital to put away, and with interest rates rising, they're going to get a return on that. They're not price sensitive; they're more location sensitive or house size sensitive. So, if they see the property that they want in the area that they want, it's all about the area. It might be because of the quality of that area, or because it's close to family and friends. So there will be areas always that command a premium, almost regardless of the market.
Yeah. I guess the flip side, though, I mean, if older buyers aren't so affected by increases in mortgage interest rates, unfortunately, it's probably the people really suffering are younger people and first-time buyers. I mean, the outlook is pretty tricky for them.
Yeah, we've still got a large deposit to find. We've got interest rates high and highest than they were a year ago. There is a slight, I suppose there's a slight window that buy-to-let landlords are less likely to pick up the properties that the first-time buyer normally went to. But with very low wage inflation, it's going to be difficult for them to catch up. And you read some horror stories of people who've already saved a 10% deposit, but they need another 10% to actually make the move physically happen. So whether the government is going to do anything there, they've tinkered with it, but they've tinkered with the stamp duty, but that's not a huge amount of money compared with how much you actually have to find in the first instance. And if you're renting, 40% of your income is going to rent, and we know already that tenants are struggling. I think there was one statistic last week that 55% of tenants are finding it difficult to meet the cost of living, and that's only going to get worse, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to talk. We've talked about sales. It'd probably be good to spend some time talking about letting agents and the private rented sector as well. Obviously, we've got a slightly different story in that we have record rents at the moment. Incredibly, I mean, unaffordable, as you've mentioned there, for a lot of people. And we've also got reports of, this is something we've mentioned before, haven't we, about landlords leaving the sector. We're getting more and more stories about this. I mean, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Telegraph is focusing on this more than most. And if you go to the Telegraph property pages over the last week, I think there are 4 or 5 articles just, on landlords and the difficulties that they're having at the moment. Particularly, but landlords, I think, with smaller portfolios as well, don't particularly have much incentive at the moment to become a landlord. I'm just wondering where you think this might end. Are we heading towards some kind of breaking point? Because obviously, with the cost of living crisis, tenants are struggling with their rent, but landlords are struggling, and they're going to want to put rents up. So, where's it all going to lead to?
Well, it's going to be down to affordability, and it could come to a point where tenants generally cannot afford the rents that are currently being asked. We still, though, have an undersupply of properties to rent. Existing renters are staying put, so they're not moving to a better property even to rent. They're staying put, so that's going to continue. I think with the landlords as well, they've got issues that are on the horizon. We might talk about EPCs, etc., a bit later. So there's some hefty costs as well down the road for landlords, together with a pretty punishing tax regime, which hasn't helped them. If they could bring back mortgage relief for landlords, that would certainly help. So I think the government, there's been a number of government discussions and committees looking at the PRS. Whether they will do anything or can do anything, I don't know. But there is a realisation, and I think the Bank of England said as well, that they were unhappy with the state of the PRS at the moment. But that is more difficult because you're dealing with predominantly thousands and thousands of landlords who are individuals as opposed to companies. The majority will have one or two properties. So it's very difficult to do a sort of overarching or give an overarching gesture or change that will have any material effect.
Yeah, it's tricky. And you mentioned EPCs there. I feel that we should talk about this because there was an article in the Negotiator that says that the majority of landlords are not ready for the EPC rule changes at all. And of course, we're referring here to the fact that you need a minimum EPC rating of C by April 2025 for new tenancies. And of course, that's now only, what are we, 26 months away, I think April 2025. And of course, existing tenancies, that's 2028, which will probably come around quite fast as well. This report says, it's by the mortgage company MFS, apparently only 38% of landlords are actually know about this rule change and know what's required and what they have to do. And the ones that are aware of this, 64% of them are unsure how they can actually improve their EPCs. So it's kind of worrying. This is only a couple of years out, and the majority of landlords are either unaware of it, or if they are aware of it, they don't know what they can do about it. So it's a bit of a ticking time bomb, isn't it, really?
Absolutely, and particularly as normally a tenant or a purchaser really doesn't want to know about an EPC, probably doesn't even understand what an EPC is. They just want to buy that property or take a tenancy on that property. I think now with the energy costs, which we've spoken about, high and probably continue high, people will be starting to take more attention of EPCs. I don't think, as you say, landlords are wholly aware. They should, if they're letting their property through an agent, that agent will make them aware. But whether the landlord wishes to actually hear what they're saying, or they're just putting it off until tomorrow, and whether the government will extend that deadline. I mean, it's all about energy efficiency, as we know, and we know that a vast amount of properties currently being rented not only below C, but will struggle to ever get to C. Because our housing stock in this country is predominantly old stock. And there are parts of the country, northeast, northwest, particularly, who have a huge amount of sort of pre-war Edwardian Victorian homes that it may not even be worthwhile for the landlord to spend the money. So rather than spend the money, they'll just take the capital gain and walk away from it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was about to say is, this has to be done by April 2025. When it suddenly gets to the final quarter of 2024, are we suddenly going to see people worrying about a cliff edge and loads of properties going on the market as landlords are starting to run away? And if that does happen, maybe we might see the government kind of delay put the law back, give them a bit more time to comply. I'm not sure. I mean, we don't know what state the economy is going to be in either, do we? In a couple of years' time,
We don't know how is it going to be enforced. Our trading standards, are they going to go to every letting agent and say, what's your stock? Can I see your EPC? A lot of landlords don't use an agent anyway. So unless there's a register of landlords, and we've talked about that before, and there's a bit more in the recent committee's decisions on or over the PRS and the PRS changes. So it is going to be very difficult, to get that message across, because people don't want to hear bad news, and to see whether or not, even if they're willing to upgrade their property, there are the trades out there to enable them to do it at a reasonable price.
Yeah, I mean, with fines as well as up to £30,000, whether that will happen or not, I don't know. I mean, £30,000 is an awful lot of money.
If £30,000 an awful lot, I think you just say I'm out of here.
Yeah.
I'm going to sell, because if I've got to find the money to do the alterations. Okay, there's going to be some government help, and I've got to do it, and I've got to factor it in. And if I don't do it, allegedly, I'll get fined £30,000. It's a huge disincentive.
If we do have a Labour government, which is looking quite likely at some point, I think that they're going to put more emphasis, aren't they, on social housing as opposed to private rented sector. You can't suddenly build loads of new homes in a short space of time like that. So it'll be interesting to see how Labour tackle this problem, if indeed they do get the opportunity to, because they're supposed to be on tenants' side. So maybe they'll be quite keen to penalise landlords. I don't know. But obviously they're going to have a problem if we have less private rented houses and landlords are fleeing the sector, because prices will go up, demand will be strong, supply will be lower. Yeah,
it'll be interesting. We won't have to wait long, because we'll have a general election next year, probably.
Yeah, I think May is the rumour, but we shall see. From my contacts in local government, we will see. So I guess the most significant news that we've had, and this is on a similar theme, talking about lettings again. We've now had the response to the call of evidence for the Renters Reform Bill, and we've now had the cross-party levelling up committee has talked to industry experts. They've done their canvassing, and now they've released this reforming the private rented sector report, as they're calling it, which is basically them feeding back on the white paper that the government released. And now I think we need to talk about this, but there are so many different elements to it. It probably makes sense to go through it one by one. So let's start with the things that they like. And fortunately, there are quite a few things that they do seem generally in favour of. And the first one is that obviously Sector 21 is now a goner.
Yeah. Which is good, because at least, all right, this is only advisory, but at least I think it gives some clarification, and people can concentrate on other aspects rather than banging on about Section 21. It's gone. And I think one of the good things is that you've talked about the consultation. They have listened to people. They have listened. And I know Propertymark, my previous organisation, was referenced 23 times in the report, which is amazing that they've sought that opinion, listened to it, and acting on it. So that's positive.
Yeah.
Some of the aspects we're not quite so sure about. But Section 21, as you say, is a goner. That
is a goner. That one's going the way of the dodo. The other thing that they seem quite in favour of, well, strongly in favour of, this idea of having new housing courts. As we all know, the local courts and England county courts are completely overwhelmed at the moment. So having anything that kind of eases the pressure on those courts and can be kind of segued siloed into a housing court seems like a good idea. I imagine you think this is a good idea too.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a court specifically for housing, well resourced, and being able to deal with the issues that go to court quickly, because they are normally pressing issues. But if you've got to wait 3, 6, 9 months, as we know during the pandemic, everything was put back and put back and put back. Something that is very specific to the housing sector has got to be good.
Yeah. And another thing that there's been a positive response towards is the end of fixed term contracts. and the move towards rolling contracts, but with the exception of students. Student accommodation.
The student. I think they've listened to the arguments about students and have made some very positive changes to the proposals, giving agents that fixed term contract, obviously for a year, and other benefits around that, which is good news for students and good news for landlords.
Yeah, it's common sense as well, isn't it? Because students are obviously at university for a fixed period of time, unless they're doing some PhD or postdoc that, you know, rumbles on and on and on indefinitely. You know, if they, you know, they come out of halls of residence and then they need somewhere to live for 2 years or 1 year, it just makes sense. Again, it's good that they're listening. Yeah, is this system working? Do you think? It seems unusual, but anyway, it's good. And they're very much in favour of the decent home standard, which is something that we talked about, I think, last month as well.
Which again, positive.
Yeah.
As you say, there's too many positives. You know, we're going to be sceptical. I don't. We'd have to see. You know, it's when does it get on the statute book? That's the issue. It's all very well talking about.
Yeah, particularly if there's a change of government as well. Although I imagine that Labour would probably have an incentive to kind of push things forward. They might tweak things a little bit, but I imagine they want to beef up tenants' rights. But let's talk about some of the things that they're pushing to one side, or that there's been some pushback. The first thing is the landlords being banned from banning tenants on benefits. They're not so keen on that.
No, and the benefit issue has been rumbling on and on and on, and there was great outrage when agents were publicly stating that they wouldn't take tenants who were on benefits. And I think what people have to remember is, you know, it's a hugely competitive market. The landlord wants a tenant that's not only a decent tenant, but has the ability to pay. And what people forget about housing benefits are paid in arrears, whereas the tenant has to pay the rent in advance. So the fact it's paid in arrears is not good. And the fact that there will be, during that month while it's in arrears, there could be other pressures on tenants. So I'm not saying it's the right decision, but people need to understand what the circumstances are that a tenant who's on benefits has, how they pay and when they pay.
Yeah, there's certainly practical issues around that one, as you've just mentioned there. I mean, I think one that's been pushed back more on principle than anything else is this ban on landlords banning pets. That seems to be more to do with just the landlord's rights, doesn't it? Because I mean, if I'm not sure if you have rental property Spark actually, but
the lets with pets issue. Been there for about 4 years. There are a number of pet-orientated organisations that get very heated about it and very vocal about it. I think it's down to the landlord to make a decision. I don't think you can have a blanket ban.
Yeah.
When you see the number of people that have pets, particularly since the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, we're not against pets. I have a cat, but then again, if I was a landlord, I'm not sure if I had a small flat that I was letting out, whether I'd particularly want one of those big German Shepherd dogs living in it, particularly when I've just put a new sofa in. I don't know.
I think so, but again, it's a question that agents will have to ask and landlords will have to ask, and then they make a decision upon that rather than have a blanket ban, which they do at the moment. You know, those issues. Some of them won't allow children. Yeah.
I mean, I think yes, of course. Yeah, I'm not sure what the response to the children one was actually. But I mean, a lot of these proposals, there seems to be a lot of positive feedback, and the majority of them seem to be of the proposals in the rental reform bill seem to be a yes, but with caveats. So, for example, we've got tenants being able to leave a contract with 2 months' notice. They've said yes to that, but they've suggested that it shouldn't be in the first 4 months of the tenancy. So overall, you're looking at a 6 months minimum, which is good.
Then for 6 months, which is good.
Yes, exactly, because there needs to be a balance, doesn't there? You know, both sides need to feel relatively secure. And then I think you wanted to talk as well about Section 8, because obviously with Section 21 gone, they had promised to beef up Section 8, but there are caveats to that one as well, or
Yeah, I
suggestions.
mean, since they announced that Section 1 would be abolished, the caveat was always that they would beef up Section 8. So forget about 21. We'll cover all the things in Section 8. I don't think there's been enough detail yet as to how that will actually be achieved and how beefy or beefed up it will be. So we need some more detail on that from them. But at least we've got some clarity on 21, if you can call it clarity.
Yeah, I mean, again, they're being asked to comment on plans that haven't been fully fleshed out yet, and I think the response to the new property portal was a bit like that as well. And they're saying, yes, good idea in theory, but everything should be digitized if possible, and you know, what do you actually want to include in this? So yeah, good in theory. We're waiting to see exactly how it would work. Yeah,
how it would work, and again how it would be policed, because you're asking every landlord to input all this information onto a portal. If he doesn't, what are you going to do? Well, you don't even know if he's a landlord. That's the other issue.
Yes, landlords register. Yeah. I mean, I know that you have concerns about this, don't you, or doubts as to whether, not necessarily whether it's a good idea, but whether it's realistic and whether it's practical and can be implemented.
I think it's a good idea. How it's going to be implemented is going to be incredibly difficult. We know from that report that they're now recommending that there is only one ombudsman for letting agents and landlords, which we've heard some differing opinions on. I know that landlords or letting agents would be worried about double jeopardy. In other words, they could be taken to an ombudsman and the landlord of the property can be taken to the ombudsman. But I think we will only get to that stage when we've actually got a register of landlords, because at the moment there's no way of actually tracking them or identifying them as landlords. So we need that first stage before we can go to the next stage.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, we're talking about a lot of uncertainties into the future, haven't we, over the last 10 minutes? And I just wanted to round off today's discussion by putting you on the spot, as I tend to do annoyingly. Sorry. Where do you think, this is a kind of a broad, almost existential question here. We've got trouble, obviously, with first-time buyers getting onto the market. We have a shortage of stock. We have a lack of private rented sector properties. We have a potential change of government coming up. Where do you think this is all headed? But I don't want you to just look sort of a year or two ahead. Trends in property can move quite slowly. Where do you think we'll be in 20 years' time? What do you think the sector's going to look like?
I think something has to change, because we can't continue to have housing costs going up and up and up. We know that the prime motivators since time began was shelter and food. You can deal with food, but shelter is always going to be needed. Are we going to have a shift in housing into multi-generational housing? I don't know. It works in some American countries, it works in some of the European countries, but basically we have a huge undersupply. We have an aging housing stock in this country, so you know they will come to the end of their life at some point. We've got the vast majority of houses being built by public listed companies who are interested only in profit. If we could have a government building company who's building solely, and social is probably the right word because there's a stigma attached to that, for affordable homes, but you know, to magic up vast amounts of houses takes generations to do that. You know, we're only building nearly up to 250. We've got reports now we'll be back down to 180,000 this year, because unless they can make a profit, they won't build. So are you going to do something? Years and years ago, there was something called development land tax. So if you had land that was a development land, you'd be taxed on it, whether or not it was developed. Are they going to nationalise building land and allow it to be developed at cost, which would have a very material effect on values? Because if the building land, which at the moment is a large proportion of the cost, becomes sort of almost at nil value, All right, the new ones will be very low cost, but that will devalue the whole of the housing stock. So whether that, I don't know. 20 years, as you say, is not a long time. And because, we've got this revolving door of housing ministers, for instance, which is absolutely ridiculous. We're on to our 6th, I think, the last week. We've got the Secretary of State whose now hands are being tied about expenditure that he can actually authorise. And it's become very political, and it shouldn't be political. You want to take the politics out of property.
Yeah, and I guess some of these questions as well are kind of related to broader economic circumstances, whether we, may have a period of socialism or something, maybe not outright socialism, but something slightly more towards the left. If we do have a Prime Minister Keir Starmer, it'll be interesting to see what his plans are. I know he says that he wants to put more spades in the ground to build more houses, but of course we've heard that before.
That every Prime Minister, every housing minister, every Secretary of State is, we need more, we need more spades. We need more, you need more sites that are shovel ready. But I remember a previous Prime Minister, and the one before, not the previous one, but a couple of ways, their instructions to their PR companies: just get me somewhere with a high-vis jacket and a hard hat, and that will be good, because I can be shown to be helping people to have a home, which of course they haven't been able to do.
No, just tinkering around the edges, probably. But no, I think that's probably a good place to leave today's discussion. Thanks again for your time, Mark. It's been an education as always, and we'll reconvene in a month's time, and hopefully we might have some more clarity over the issues that we've talked through today. So thanks for your time, Mark, and thanks to everyone that's watching as well. Thank you. Bye.